Thank you all for coming. It feels good to be here in the basement, I think. I had these visions on my way here, imagining that it was going to be very, very hot and intense, but instead it's nice and cool, which is interesting for me. But I think, it's good to be underground here because that's where poetry comes from, and that's where I think poetry flourishes. We're here to celebrate Anthony's book, Haunting the Black Air, and I think a new book by Anthony Joseph is a big deal. Since the 1990s, he's been a really important contributor to poetry in Britain. He's been a kind of fearless presence, a kind of vital figure for many of us. His work is experimental, treats language as a material and as a substance. His language, I think, has a history. It has a kind of climate. His language has a kind of grain to it. These are the things I've been thinking about as I've been reading you this week. The work's also lyrical and intimate, so it's experimental, but it doesn't sacrifice intimacy with the reader. And it's involved in memory. The work is often kind of brings with it memories of grandparents, memories of childhood. Come on in. Of friends and of comrades. It's a generous, capacious poetry that holds a lot of people in it. And it also looks to the future, I think, and so looks to a kind of horizon often. It's geographic and it's precise too. In many of his poems, it feels like I think we're standing just beside Anthony. He's just slightly up in front, maybe, showing you a path or a track or a route. He's not afraid of mystery in his work either. He's also not scared to lay down some knowledge and teach you things and make you sit up straight and kind of get real with things. And of course, he also knows how to make it swing, right? And to have a kind of verbal music that accompanies everything and gathers from a very broad tradition. And this book is a deep book, I think. I've been reading it, as I say, for a couple of weeks, and I feel like I'm just beginning to kind of scratch the surface in it, or like you get lost in it and find certain kind of roots through it. It's not the kind of book that you can neatly summarize. It's not disposable in that way. It's a kind of book that contains resistances and kind of might produce resistances too in an exciting way. It's in these 8 sections or movements and has this kind of architecture to it, this definite architecture to it. I don't want to say it's different to anything that you've written before, but it seems to have a kind of freshness actually to it, which is unusual also if you're 6 books in, to be getting better and better, I want to say. There's no resting on laurels here, and there's no sense of going through the motions. It's kind of it's vital, as I say, right? And so we're gonna do some talking with each other this evening, and there'll be time for you all to ask some questions and discuss things. But Anthony's gonna read, and then we'll talk a little bit, and then read some more. The last thing I'll do before handing over to you is there are 3 quotations I was thinking about from a poem. Well, there are 3 authors who Anthony mentions in the poem New York Soul for James Oscar in this collection. These writers are kind of like a holy trinity. So there's Edouard Glissant, Frantz Fanon, and André Breton. And I went through my books this morning and I thought of something that Glissant says. He says, "In every authorized language, you will build your language." And Fanon says, "The real leap consists in introducing invention into existence. In the world through which I travel, I am endlessly creating myself." And Breton says, "Beauty will be convulsive or it will not be at all." So Anthony Joseph.
Amazing. Yeah, that's great. Before I start, I want to give thanks to Luke for doing this. This is the second time that Luke has stepped in to sort of, to kind of almost host me. It's a very selfless act, I think, for another poet to say, okay, I'm going to interview you, I'm going to support your work. And I got to give Luke some love for that. And I owe you. So the next time you do a collection, I'm going to do this to you. I'm going to do it. No, seriously,
Yeah.
I definitely owe Luke. So thank you. Um, I'm just going to read a few poems clearly. It reminds me of Bukowski before reading. He says, and now I will read poetry. So I will read poetry. This is a poem called Autography from Merle Collins and Ted Jones. So, autography is a surrealist technique that Ted Jones was an African American poet. You guys look like you know who Ted Jones was, right? You know? Does anyone know Ted Jones? A few people? Yeah. African American poet, surrealist poet. I think Breton called him the only American surrealist for a time. He was a crazy guy. Um, so this is dedicated to him and also to Merle Collins. So the thing that Ted Jones one of the things he's famous for is producing this technique called autography, where you take a photograph and cut the subject out and leave a black space. And you can find examples of it online. And that was his contribution, which says a lot of things. It's a political act to leave a black outline of a portrait of someone. It's really fascinating, simple but fascinating. Merle Collins is a Grenadian author, Grenadian poet primarily. Um, and this poem is kind of riffing on one of the things that she says in one of her poems in the 80s. In the poem, she talks about people from the Caribbean and from the smaller islands of the Caribbean being proud of where they're from and not saying, oh, I'm from the Caribbean. Or some people even say, I'm from South America. She's like, no, don't say you're from South America. Say Grenada. Say it. Say the word, which I thought was quite powerful. And she also talks about the word immigrant, which this poem riffs on at the end. Autography. Autography defines experimental writing as writing that questions the possibility of the natural possibility of an excogitated voice, an animation of personas, dialogue, and art in other nations of sound, fiendish collage, bricolage, fragmentation of the eye upon a palimpsest revealing multiple frames of autography, forms and mechanisms and or frames of deception and transparency. As Jones, as the new is such a thing as among another which is as innovative or Homeric as the strange often is challenging. How the word is read, i.e., its syntax and flax, its slack typography, its reputation as the wind, its pursuit of exhaustion, its stutter and the wound, its pursuit of America, its geoglyph from above, its pursuit of fever, possessing both search and found, its Whitman and Merle, its persona of aroma, its exurb of diverse cities, its pursuit of attributes of silence, cunning, and exile. Its suggestion that the word explorer should be used instead of immigrant. The corpus of its own canon, a sense of wonder, canon, a driven river. A poem is always a list of echoes. And at its heart, this word migrant, which sounds not unlike margin, tarring, negro, or worse. And this is Drummer of Isla. So Albert Isla was an American saxophonist, free jazz saxophonist, who a lot of you would know. One of the more interesting musicians of the 20th century. Very powerful, very passionate, very fierce, but also very human. There's something really beguiling about his work in a very human way that you could, different from a lot of free jazz players who you feel that they kind of go over your head and you can't really get it. With Isla, it cuts into your soul. It's really powerful music. There's a documentary that came out a few years ago on Isla called, I think it's called My Name is Albert Isla. And there's an interview in there with a drummer who played with Isla in Copenhagen in the early 60s when Isla was there before he became the icon that he became. And the guy, if you see the video, he sounds like a Trinidadian. He's got this really strong Caribbean accent. His name is Lionel Marshall, and I was obsessed with him, obsessed with finding out who he was, but there's absolutely no information online about him. He seems to have completely disappeared. But he talks about playing with Isla as embarking on a journey in which, you know, you don't know how it's going to end. So you just have to dive in and hope for the best. This is Drummer of Isla. In the shut-up house, and all the doors are folded, and water fills each room, sends everything not fixed afloat. The flood and swole and wholesome detritus, bottles of antique perfume, slave registers, rubber eyes for sand puppet teeth. When it all rose too tall for the louver blades, rain poured in like pus. On these mornings in the arable lands and the river that overcame and washed away sorrow most, all my dexterous muscle with age, my tiger balm, my oyster knives, and left the flour brown and soft like mud or warm salted milk away in the flood. Or from a desert where the railway ended like a breathless mouth, suffocating to the edge of slow black a hole, suffer of breath, like some energy was pulling our breath from our bodies, pulling us back and yet pushing us forward towards the edge until we gasp like gas of capsicum, slow to pull free, but up and fling up mountain top with the beat up team. When we looked back at the earth, ground we saw was being pulled like tarpaulin, rippling, revealing its dark brown dermis, tender flesh beneath the skin of skins, surface as if the earth was being surged and sucked into a whirlpool, fading into gape and granular and too centripetal and too cold. Someone screamed, and some good folk ran downhill to help those who fell near the mouth of it. I might have moved down a little bit, but most like stayed upon solid ground. Later that night, I walked upon the village as if my name was Lionel Marshall, drummer of Isla in Copenhagen, 1966, surveying the flood before stepping in. Yeah, okay. So there's references to a lot of writers in this book. I don't know, it wasn't planned, it just happened. This is another dedication poem. There's also a lot of dedications. I guess as you get older and people die or whatever, you have more dedications in your books. These two guys are still alive though, as far as I remember. So this is a poem for Will Alexander, who's an LA poet, really radical experimental poet. Do you have any Will Alexander work here? I don't think so, but yeah. Definitely worth checking out. Really interesting language. I won't say he's a language poet, but does strange things with language. And Brent Edwards, who's a scholar at Columbia, who's a good friend, good supporter, really interesting writer about music. This is kind of inspired by being with them both in Harlem, in New York, a few years ago. And walking through Harlem and looking at all the sort of remnants of jazz, the sort of jazz scene that was there in the 50s and the 60s. And also a comment on New York and the politics of New York at the time. Combustible, the Chuck Rainey, for Will Alexander and Brent Edwards. Froze, all your baseball fields are frozen. all your serpent streams and pillars of ice, all your streets of Malcolm and Lennox, all your Amy Root cornbread and fried chicken, collard greens, your candied yams, all your Frederick Douglass, your boulevard, the Abyssinian church where Will shouted, Adam Clayton Powell. All these things and more, all these things and more. Apollic, the Apollo where James Brown's body lay. The Apollo where James Brown's body lay a mile long around the blessed streets of Harlem, snare tight, old Harlem of Mintons and with Mingus and Don Bias, the Lennox lounge of tall greyhounds and cocktails. But your boots are frozen, and your windows too, and there is ice up in your teeth, all your geology, all your plate tectonics, all the brown rims of your river clouds, and your coal rivers, and the black pools we all fall into, all the verbs of your thighs, all your Hoover spring floors with mics beneath, frozen, all your streets that traverse mathematical angles and bridges, West 33rd and Broadway, all your lilac perimeters, all your concrete horizons, all the free will and literate thought becoming booming from your breath in this frost. All your weeping sepulchres and the wailing walls which crumbled and were washed away. All your pillars and pulleys and apparatuses of suspension of mother and son side by sycamore side, all your fragile hypotheses of snow, all this cold morning so white, so pure. So the kind of central section of this book is a series of 13 prose poems, which was interesting to get included in the book. At first, when I submitted the manuscript to my agent, he was like, maybe we should leave the prose poems for another book. But then he came back to me about a month after and said, nah, let's leave them in. And I'm glad we did, because they are part of the sort of architecture and feeling of the book. So I'm going to read a couple of them. Yeah. Yeah. This is, yeah, I need to, I've been pretending not to need glasses, but I feel a lot better. Oh, wow, I can see. It's amazing. Baron Samedi in the Incense Taxi. Baron Samedi is a voodoo, primarily Haitian voodoo loa or spirit, who is known to be very comical but vicious at the same time. Really interesting character who, when he enters the service, I mean, this is a whole other question, a whole other conversation, but when he enters the ceremonies, he possesses people and makes them behave very rude. I don't know if rude is the word, but he's a freak. Baron Samedi in the Incense Taxi. The bookshop was in receivership, so they distracted us with French New Wave film, Nouvelle Vogue, and in the darkened halls where we sold for none, I moved within a black stove-mouth suit and a felt hat and felt dapper, double-breasted, slick, and hid within the boon of chaos, moving effortless-like between the annals of rhyme and the black interest section, hiding from surveyors and forklifts sent to puncture our waist, and stealing what I could carry. And in this grove of workers there was my good friend Femi, with whom I plotted a ruse to sell political tracts on the streets of 1950s San Francisco. Femi worked the lower town down, and I stood uphill near Haight and saw him selling subversive pamphlets in the Fairmont like a good communist. Until the police arrived to brutalize poor Femi, to slap him up and arrest him in this dead man's land, knee cuffs of grief, so full of tears. They put my friend in a squad car between two cold priests. Femi turned his head to plead at me, his face so hot and black with sunken eyes and panic. and I tipped my hat and grinned on him as they drove him away to pre-pine and dubwise sufferation. And I'm going to read one more of these. Um, yeah, these are some of my favorite poems in the book because they're funny and in a grotesque way, which I love. Um, so yeah, let me read. Okay, this is fun. Yeah, I wouldn't explain anything about. I'll read. I'll just read it. Fung. Fung. I see the man, Russell. I see the man in the fisheries. One nasty bandy-leg ditch-digging little man. He's sitting on a pose, say he's skinning shark, and you know how hard shark is to peel. All this time, well, me and no Miss Riley watching. But she could peep all the peep she want through she jealousy, and fling she eye from hill to sea, and macko hard when people going about their business, trying to gather a little change to buy a box juice or some turtle prick soup to eat, and she still can't see nothing. That woman owe me $40 since June. It's September now. And every time I ask she for my money, she mashing brakes, saying how she had was to buy powder milk and sulfur flowers, how she had to pay the Mr. Bale, how she father have big stones, how current gone, so the good kingfish she had in the icebox spoil, water gone, oil spoil, her house falling down, ditch to dig, pig to kill. She mother dead and froth out caustic milk and boiling camphor boil. Now is money again to church and bury. Is so many excuse. Like Miss Riley want me to make a jail, but not me, Russell. I could wait. I patient. If it's one thing I could do is wait. Russell, remember the little no-teeth boy who used to work in the Chinese people shop in Pittsburgh, Mao Feng, near where Didier and Hayden used to live? Where Marvin and Bing used to hide and sell the little weed? Yes, the Chinese shop that always full of dust and living brown sugar, comic book and salami skin. They never had nothing in that shop except penny cool, sold prune, and gazette paper. Always was empty. And that screw-faced Mao Feng would just sit down there on a stool with his toti in his hand, day long waiting for time to dead so he could go home and proper jock his prick. Is there I used to buy my evening news every Friday to follow the top pop charts, the Billboard 100 and the British top 10, to see how them foreign tune was rising and falling in the numbers. Them newspaper people musta know I did read that, 'cause they used to print it in the corner of page 14 every Friday just for me. Oh Superman, you start me up, but I can't stand it. I used to cut the list out and paste it in a yellow notebook with that clear sellotape that used to smell so sweet. All them days I wouldn't thump a man if he cussed me. I did fraid. Shy. But it's Didier who tell me he hear about that same Mao Feng, how Feng had gun under the counter, a dirty iron pistol, and how Feng had somebody to shoot. Didier tell me, somebody better reel that boy in a poem before he kills somebody. But it take me 36 years to write it. And by that time, Feng done shoot who he have to shoot and shoot himself too. And finally in this section, actually I was going to read Concert for the Mountains, but no, I think do you want me to read it?
Yeah, why not?
Concert for the Mountains. I walked my friend to the station after our late night session running tune for tune rare grooves. Sudden so, as we walked upon the 4-day morning, my friend buck and start to catch nostalgia, talking about music, good friend, and once upon, the connection between sound and black heritage. He climbs a tree near the station, an easy tree to climb with soft thin branches and mere minor pickajook. But when he arrives at the top and looks down, the landscape has changed. The station is gone, the railway is gone, the road we walked is gone, The city is gone. All has become a sprawling farmyard of chicken shit and mud. He shakes the tree and its fruit must fall. The fruit should be like green papaya, but soft. One should crack the earth and reveal its core, the white cocoa-like pods inside. Scoop out one and taste it, sour. Another gourd has been written on, drawn on, a palimpsest of maps of a city of glass. Break it open, rotten, upside down, bogus, a fipple reed, a roll of film. One should fall near the cow pen and burst to be full of copper money. There is a pepper tree, a lime and tuberculosis root, paraplegic fruit left to rot on the vine, salt lick, turpentine, a bovine farm. There is a shotgun hand peeping through a crack in time, black bone thumb rest, a rifle rust brown double barrel pitch pine handle, boxes of colonial cartilage. A white pot hound walks from behind a fowl coop with a barrel resting across his right shoulder. He says, "You boys best get the hell out of here before I bust some corn and get giddy." During this ceremony, whole packs of dogs gather in the muddy yard around him. They roll in the mud and cry. My friend and I walk to the edge of the land. Our promo shot is panned across the clear chasm of a canyon, then a plateau, 1,020 feet above sea level, where Nina Simone is in concert with a string quintet and an orchestra of trombones. Slide Hampton. Simone rises from her piano stool and, singing, walks to the front of the stage. She arches her back and sings until her navel string bursts and her voice pours and uncoils over the mountains. There is no audience but my friend and I, no 6/8 blues like Nina's. So maybe a couple short poems and then I will stop. Stop for now, probably get to read some more later. But part of my attempt in this book, I think, was to write. A lot of things have happened in the last few years between the last book and this. A lot of stuff. One of the things that happened was I had a serious bout of depression. Very very hard, proper depression. Not feeling sad, bad, that lasted a whole summer. I was in Chicago doing a residency, and it just hit me on day one of me getting there. It's a long story, but it knocked me out for that whole summer. And one of the things besides medication that I needed was I came back to London and joined this Buddhist meditation group, and that helped. So anybody that's going through that or has gone through that, meditation helps. It really helped me, especially Buddhist meditation, and that had a real impact on my work, I think. It made me more as a poet. I think there's a spirituality to poetry. A deep, there's something about poetry that brings you really into yourself, and at the same time takes you into the world in a very deep and spiritual way. We're not here to really talk about that, but it was a real important moment for me, and it made me realize that, yeah, poetry is a kind of religious practice or meditative practice, which I'd suspected. But, becoming a serious practitioner of meditation did have an impact. And it made the work a lot more transcendent, or reaching for this space of transcendence where it's beyond language and using language in a way that is different. Anyway, this is called Pamberry. And I think this kind of comes together in this poem. Pamberry. Juan de Meliac taught us how to clarify butter. Juan said, "Rub stinging nettle on Asim big stones, then hide his clothes up a riverbank." So we rubbed stinging nettle all in Asim big eye and left him to wriggle and pine, naked on a river rock. and then fling from some far veranda, sharp stone pelting from some far ago, but reaching us beside the water. Down further from the bamboo peeping, you never look up till a sharp stone trouble your skull. Somebody there pelting. Sharko's duck and lochan dip, but one hit me right in the center part and burst my skull into 2 afternoons. Look him day, forward up by Pambury Panyard with a gilpin cutlass between he teeth, whether pigfoot carbide or iron ore, not upright like a khaki tree, you can't catch he. Crossing the river I fell, and my gun-mouth khaki get brown and stick like magnet to my leg. I had to walk home via black shack alleys and viaducts so no one would notice the color was wet. So I have to find a better way of explaining what that poem is about, I think, because I don't know if people get it, but it's based on an experience I had when I was a kid in Trinidad in school. We used to leave school half day and go down to the river and spend the rest of the afternoon teaching ourselves. A group of friends of mine, and we were quite wicked as little boys often are. So there was a gang of us, and there was one kid who we used to kind of take the piss out of, take advantage of. We used to do some wicked shit to him. We were just cruel guys. But anyway, one day we were down there and provoking this dude, and somebody started pelting at us. And we could see, we were by the river, and he looked around. You couldn't see anywhere when anyone was pelting. And when we looked far off in the distance, there's a house and a guy. We could make out this guy in the house, but it was just too far. It was really impossible for him to be pelting and hitting us. But it was just him, and we could see him standing there and gesticulating with his hands, saying move or whatever. And it was like magic. I was like, how does this guy, with these small stones, pelt from all that distance? I mean, it was far. And it still baffles me how he was able to hit us from all that way away. So it's kind of inspired by that, which I thought was magic. It was an example of magic. Yeah, we got hit. We got properly hit with these stones, and we had to stop doing what we were doing. Fascinating. So I'll just read one more a poem from this, and then we'll move on. Okay. I think I'll read Wire, one of the Wire poems. Wire, head. My grandfather won't kiss me on the lips. He grins like tsetse fly bite him in both eyes, pulls and rears his growl. He says, I got 600 man to pay, Tony. Where I getting that money from? Then he up and bump rugged across the dust. When he leaves, I cut my left hand off at the wrist and put it in the fridge. Maman told me, not the freezer, blood clot and corpuscle. Top of the fridge was where my tape deck sat in 1982, waiting to catch Casey Kasem with the red button. In the same shed, the old man kept his chisels and his hacksaw blades. I checked the minute hand. Later, they were cold. The fingers curled. I massaged the palm and knew it could be better stitched. My mouth didn't shut right. Doctor said he'd have to operate, fix my head, rebuild my gum by gum by gum in plastic rooms with fiber optics, enamel, and after there was a knot of surgical wire on the left side of my skull. Now every time I open my mouth too wide, it pulls on the back of my throat. I worry that the cable might burst, but it was strong. I seen it done before. They use the same string for everything, even the universe. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Just because you mentioned Will Alexander and you had to put your glasses on, I saw him read at the Whitechapel Gallery a couple of years ago, and he was in this room above the Whitechapel Gallery, and there were these big glass windows on either side, and it was at like sunset.
Yeah.
It was incredibly atmospheric and beautiful, and he's reading his really far out poetry and kind of losing my mind. And then it gets dark because the sun goes down and there's no light on in the room. And there's no fucking way he can see.
Oh shit.
You know, and he starts just impresing.
Oh, amazing.
And it was like, it was amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't do that.
This is something
that's
you're
a
going to have to do.
That's a different level, man.
And I noticed it slowly. I was like, oh, these poems are getting weirder, you know.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh, you can't see. Yeah. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how this collection came together, because your previous collection was a book of sonnets, you know, and was an experiment with a kind of consistent form. And then you had your selected poems, and now there's this. And one of the things that kind of struck me when I was reading this book is something about variety. There's many different kinds of poems in this book, and I mean that both like formally.
Yeah.
There's different poems. There's concrete poetry or visual poetry almost. There's kind of ode-like narrative poems, things like this. But then also different types of poems. You know, poems for friends, poems about childhood, and so on. And I wonder, alongside that, there's this great consistency, I think, of kind of tone or of mood or of attention or of voice or something. So there's variety and unity. And I wondered if maybe you could talk about how you put the collection together and how you think about those things, about variousness and
Well, I don't, some people, I think some authors might say, okay, I'm going to write a book of poems. I'm going to begin a project. It doesn't really happen like that for me. It happened like that with Sonnets for Albert, in a way. I was like, okay, I'm going to write a series of poems about my dad because he died, and that was the event that sort of made the thing happen. But with these, a lot of these poems I've been literally working on them for about 10 years. So a lot of these poems are quite old poems or old ideas or old fragments that I've been working on, tinkering with all along the time that I've been publishing other things. And they've just developed and developed. And I knew that I had to wait until they were ready, and they only just became ready. So they took a long time to find themselves. And the way I did it was when I realized I had a full collection's worth of poems, I started treating it as a collection and went through a series of editorial runs, basically, through the whole collection. And that's why, trying to give it a consistent tone and a consistent approach. So once it became a book, I started to work with it as a collection, if that makes sense.
because it's almost in chapters, you know. And there are sections that feel like a sequence of poems, or even just one poem, you know, in sections.
I think editing, for me, the editing process is the most fun for me. Writing the poem, sometimes it's, as you would know, is sometimes getting a poem out is sometimes agonizing and difficult. But the editing, when you're able to step away from it and look at a whole collection of poems and see the connections and manipulate the shape and manipulate the form, I think that to me is where the book really begins to come together, and when I begin to notice the narratives and the lines that run through. But I knew I wanted to write a book that was in sections rather than a themed collection. So that was the guiding principle.
So it's like there's the work, and then it finds its book rather than
finds itself.
Rather than kind of, as you say, announcing that you're going to have a themed collection, and then
I couldn't,
like, you clock in every day and
you no, exactly. But in a way, what it is there's 8 sections, there's 8 different books. I look at it like that. So each section definitely took a lot of time to make it really, work together as a unified section.
Yeah, and they speak to each other in different ways, you know, and it's one of these kind of enjoyable books where it feels almost like a landscape, and it's like you can spend some time over here and you can spend some time over here, and you find the ways that these different parts of the book connect to each other, and sometimes it feels subterranean, and sometimes it feels like you have a vantage point, like in the poem that you wrote just before the concert in the mountains, right, where you have, or if you're down in the creek, you have, as you described, the magic.
Absolutely.
Of all of that. The title, when did the title come to you, and tell us about the title of this book, this collection?
The title is from a poem by Anne Sexton called Her Kind. The first line is, "I have gone out a possessed witch, haunting the black air, braver at night." And Sexton is one of my favorite poets. She's always been, for many, many years, one of my favorite poets. And that, I love that poem and that line. I had a lot of different titles before, but once the book began to have a particular atmosphere and feeling, a lot of the poems are grotesque. A lot. I didn't read too much of that tonight, but a lot of them is.
There's still time.
Yeah. A lot of them are about mortality. A lot of them are about people who have passed. A lot of them are about the darker experiences that we might have. And whenever I want to read work like that, I turn to Sexton because I think she, more than a lot of poets, really captured that sort of the muscularity of trauma.
But with a kind of with Sexton too, there's a kind of weird sense of humor in her work too.
Exactly.
So she's she kind of enjoys alarming you a little bit, or kind of just pushing you a little bit. And seeing
that's probably why I love it. I love her work. Yeah.
Where's the poem gonna go? Yeah, that's so interesting to me that to have Sexton there. I don't know. I didn't put you two together before.
Yeah, she's not a really popular poet anymore.
No,
a lot of people
gone out of fashion.
Yeah, she's gone out of fashion. But yeah,
she's great.
Yeah.
It reminded me also, this idea, haunting the black air, reminded me of a phrase the American poet Peter Gizzy uses, where he has a collection called Archaeophonics. She describes as the kind of the study of lost sound, right? And he talks about poetry as that kind of archaeology, right? The archaeology of lost sound. He says that's what poetry kind of is, kind of listening backwards. And I wondered about that for you. There's a line I was thinking about loss, and you have a great line where you talk about the rubric of our history is synonymous with loss.
Yeah.
And so I wondered about, where that falls for you. Haunting the black air is very, you could do a lot with that title, and I wondered about that sense of a lost tradition, or poetry as a place where you recover things. Poetry is a place where you listen. Poetry is, it's not just you producing, you're also listening,
Yeah, that's really interesting. That poem that you're referring to, that line is from, is called Empires. And I've been fascinated for a few years, or it's been on my mind, coming from the Caribbean, coming from Trinidad, and looking at the things that we have created in the Caribbean under really difficult circumstances. So my family, part of my family, my father's family, live in this, I'll read the poem after actually, live in a valley called Malik. And it's very poor space, people, very lower working class people. And I've been going there since I was a kid. My grandmother used to take me there when I was young. So I've grown up kind of going to this place, which is like a village in the hills, and all my sort of family, a lot of my relatives lived there. And one year I was there. I'd gone home for holiday. It's a strange thing, going to Trinidad for holiday, for carnival. And I was standing around with some of my cousins, and they were clearing a drain. And I was just looking around at the landscape and how they'd built these really beautiful wooden houses. They'd taken this land, this poverty, and they'd created really amazing beauty in this landscape that was basically synonymous with loss, synonymous. This is where poor black folk were sent. This is where, after slavery, a lot of people didn't have anything, and they squatted land in the hills, and that's where that community comes from. So I was just looking at that and thinking of how amazing it is that they've created this beauty, And actually there's a quote, I don't know if the quote is before that poem, by Walcott, where Walcott was asked, how do you reconcile the history, the sort of colonial history of a place with what it is now? And he says that, if you look at the landscape, you can see the remnants of the sugarcane plantation, you could see that, but the beauty of the landscape is larger. The beauty of the land, the beauty of the trees, the beauty of the valley is greater. It doesn't erase history, but it is there as well, it's powerful as well. So I don't know if that makes any attempt to answer your question.
Yeah, it does, I think. It does. I suppose the other, that's kind of haunting, right? That's kind of
Yeah.
that's something there. I wonder.
I think the haunting element is really it's just this constant struggle. It's a constant struggle. Haunting for me means something that is persistent, but is sort of unseen. This unseen force that's haunting you, that you don't really have control over, you know. And definitely history haunts the Caribbean and haunts a place like Malik. You know, you can see the remnants of struggle and real, you know, suffering. People, you know, even now, a lot of people there don't have running water, you know. A lot of people have to go and get water in a bucket and bring it all the way down the hill. Some people don't have electricity, so that's haunting. That the haunting of history.
Yeah.
You know. Anyway. Yeah.
We were doing. Yeah, good. I wonder
I
about.
feel like we're going deep.
Yeah. I hope that's okay.
Yeah.
The next one's even, you know.
That's great. It's great. Go
I
for it.
wanted to ask about politics in your sense of kind of a political poetry, because your work is obviously political, and it's interested in struggle,
Mm-hmm.
and it's interested in, as you say just then in that account, right? A question of history and of thinking about history and thinking with history and challenging and maybe moving against received histories and finding new histories and so on.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always interested in this with poets, about their relationship to the time that they're in and the present day and the present moment.
Yeah.
And I wonder, this is too open a question maybe, but how do you deal with that in your work? Because there are some poets historically where you feel like they're getting up and they're reading the paper and they're trying to write to that, you know? And then there are some poets who you feel like no current event, no event can ever touch their poetry. It has to be over here.
Yeah.
I think your work is not really faced with that kind of binary. It's doing something different, and it's doing something. You talked before about transcendence, and maybe that's something there, or maybe it's like a sinking, like going deeper. And I just wonder what you feel about that in terms of addressing yourself as a poet to the present.
That's really good. That's a really good question. Which is I think no. I mean, for me, I decided many years ago when I first started writing, when I was about 11 or 12, that I wanted my poetry. I felt that there was value in writing poems that were not fixed in any particular time. You know, I didn't want to have, you know, like a lot of contemporary poets would mention Instagram in their poems or mention the net. I'd never do that, because I don't want the poems to be dated. I want them to sort of transcend. Because I remember reading a lot of, you know, poems when I was a kid, and these are, you know, by all the great poets, you know, Keats and Yeats and all these dudes. They never really spoke about things that were purely, some of them, but not really purely contemporary things. There's almost this effort to write a poem that outlasted them. And I wanted to do that with my work from an early age. So yeah, I've never tried to really incorporate a lot of contemporary culture or whatever. But occasionally it does come in to it. Occasionally you see glimpses of the present. Usually in prose rather than poetry. With poetry, I have a lot of time to sort of manage it a lot better, but sometimes in prose it does come out. I have nothing against it. I think that, you know, this relationship to time should be quite fluid as a poet. You know, I think sometimes I'm writing poetry and I overhear something on the radio, like a song lyric, and it finds its way into the poem. You know, so you have to incorporate the present and the past and the future. You have to work with them at the same time. Yeah, I can't be like, oh, I'm not writing anything about the present. I'm only writing about the past. No, you have to find a way of making everything come into the poem. And treat time as this sort of fluid thing, you know.
Yeah, I think that squares for how I was reading this book. Maybe that the poems are like these places where these things get transformed too, right? That like once you're in the poem, the kind of the laws of history and time and so on don't necessarily
Yeah.
apply. You can suspend them, and you can do
Absolutely.
different things, and you can bend
Yeah.
them.
And
And shape
I
them.
think the poem should also be a poet's work should have like a sort of rules to itself, and sort of a poet should create a universe of their own work, that has its own rules and its own dimensions. And that's what I've tried to do.
What, what about that poem, Gaddafi Rolex?
Oh,
It's in this
man.
section. This is like one of the kind of like hardest poems in the book. I was kind of amazed by it, but I wonder what. Maybe you have. I want to make you read it. Basically,
I will
This
read
is
it in
why
a
I
sec.
brought it up.
Yeah.
Because that poem, like Gaddafi Rolex, just as a title, is so amazing, and there's something about that where I was reading this and I was like, yeah, I remember like Gaddafi at the G8 summits or whatever during the war on terror. I was like, this is so wild, man. Like, what's going on? But I wonder, but there's something there where like the poem can contain all of these kind of wild.
Yeah.
It's just
exactly.
it's like the perfect surreal image,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah.
Gaddafi
Yeah.
Rolex. That was.
I will
I was
read
going to
it, yeah,
spring
I'll
it
read
on you as being like.
No, it's-
I sent Anthony a list of the poems beforehand. Where I was like, these are the ones I like, just so you know. But my taste.
I've read a couple of them.
You have. You've been very good. I wonder. I've got a few more questions. If you're happy.
No, that's fine.
Yeah.
Absolutely, man.
I wondered. I mean, you've talked a little bit about editing and how you put the book together. I know performance is like it's not just important for you, right? It's absolutely something that you are involved in deeply and have been for a long time as a musician, as a reader of your poems with musicians, as a reader of your poems in various different locations. You read a lot.
Yeah.
And I wonder about that practice, that work that you do, which involves, being in a room full of people or being with other people in a certain kind of way, and how that relates then to the practical work of putting the book together, and whether one informs the other. The book is such a weird thing, I think, for a poet eventually to have, because it's like, or at least I feel like this.
Yeah.
Because then, like, it's over in a way. Like,
Yeah.
in some way, the act of writing has finished, right? But then the act of reading and performing maybe begins in a. Does that make sense? As a kind of these slightly different. These activities, it seems to me, call on slightly different forms of attention or forms of relation, and I just wonder if you could talk about those two things.
Yeah.
And how they relate to each other.
Well, I mean, we could talk a lot about performance and the sort of importance of performing poetry, but I think everyone's aware that poetry is a form of spoken music. Poetry is a poem is a score for the human voice, right? So the musical element or the sonic element of a poem is like 50% of the poem. It's a really important element of the poem. But we all know this. But I think the larger question about performance and whether that shapes the work, how that shapes the work, I think it's the other way around. I think for me, it's definitely the work, the writing shapes the performance. For me, as much as I love performing and reading poetry, it's a terminal activity. By that time, you've written the poem, you've had the fun, and the main fun of it, or the main pleasure for me, or the main sort of spiritual experience of it, is in the writing and the editing of the poem. The performance is almost like a ceremony. It's like bringing the word to the people. It's like conducting. It's like a minister going in front of a congregation and just reading the gospel. The gospel has already been written. The thing is there, So yeah, the performance is the part where I could experiment with delivery, but by that time the poem is done. It's the poem on the page is what dictates how the poem is performed after that.
That's really interesting. Yeah. So it's not like you read them and then change them. So you read.
Yeah.
No, it's like it's a thing that you do and then
Yeah.
it's delivered.
I think, some poets
Yeah.
work like that.
Yeah.
No, I am really attached to the poem on the page. I'm really
Mhm.
attached to that idea of
Mhm.
the poem as a score. In the same way that these dudes, like Beethoven or Chopin, whatever, they compose these things and they put a score down.
Mhm.
That's the score. That's what they want you to play.
Mhm.
That's the song. That's the poem, right? So in that way, yeah, the score is there. You can read it with your own inflection and you can but it's always an attempt to return to what the page is trying to do.
Yeah, there's something there about the finished for you, I think, and the object or
Yeah.
the thing having a kind of firmness or
Yeah, there is.
something that you can walk all the way around.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
The poem that you can walk
But
all
it's
the way
the
around.
experience. I think the experience of performing is its own thing and its own experience and has its own importance. And I don't think you could sort of compare them and judge them against each other. They're too separate. They're really separate experiences. And performance is where, especially with music, when I perform with the band, that's a really interesting experience because it's the time where you really have to be yourself. You can't fake. You're in the moment. You have this band behind you. You have an audience in front of you. You can't say, let me do this again. Let me pose a different way. Let me repeat this line. You have to be true.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, the audience sees right through you. So you got to be really honest and transparent. And that's really beautiful. That's a really beautiful moment. And you become yourself. Performance forces you to become yourself.
That's great.
Yeah.
Do you want to read a couple more and then have some questions? I
I wouldn't
we've
read
been talking
that
for quite a long time. We could.
That's fine. No, I'll read the poem you wanted. What's it called? Gaddafi Rolex. Gaddafi Rolex. Yeah, I'm not going to explain that. It's kind of self-explanatory, I think. Gaddafi Rolex. Amin Dada Komen. Amin Dada Koma Done. Pedro Segundo. Papa Gun. Gone. Segundo Dolabaile. Gone and dead with so much parang unsung. Barry White and disappear from here. Gaddafi wears a silk shirt, purple, stenciled with the faces of African leaders. Gaddafi Rolex. God-awful dictator's hat. But there is more than money to be made, more than the moon to lift the eye to, more than a chant to kill death. To kill death is to drown the river, is to caress the marabonta's nest, cobweb and dust then swept with a coquillier broom. My heart is a sort of island, nostalgia, mostly grief, a haunting sound, the frequency of some magnetic feeling. I wanted to read this poem, which is called. So there's a couple poems in here, a few poems that are named that have Buckmouth in the title. So Buckmouth is a name that I've used for my grandfather. My grandfather, I grew up with my grandfather and my grandmother. My grandfather was a very strict disciplinarian. I don't know, man. Just heavy guy, heavy guy. Very unfeeling, very cold, which is a political story in itself because a lot of Caribbean men of the 70s were like that. And, slavery has its resonances. The fact that these men, their ancestors were enslaved and stripped of their humanity meant that that generation of people who grew up in the sort of 1930s, 40s, 50s were very hard. The men, Caribbean men of that generation are very hard. And my grandfather was like that. And I call him Buckmouth for that reason. In which Buckmouth has a blackout, the Bobby Bland. Buckmouth stepped up like Bobby Bland 2 steps from the blues. But I never intended to speak of his hose or of him coming upstairs, of the pleated drape flannel folding as he staggered from the garage to the kitchen to say, "Shugs, I had a blackout." But such is similar to Bland in every frame of this, the weight of the moment crushing the light, and the woman's voice lifted bright with tacit knowledge of such things as pressure and blood. Even if I cannot be sure where he stood in relation to the light, or how the scene seems always rushed in rain, in that moment I wished him life. Surely a blackout was portentous of endless sleep, or at least of eyes closed in lightless loss of even the dark. Versailles. The trumpeter of Caribbean blood, with the new sound. We saw him with his good hand at the festival in Versailles. His band are dressed as acrobats and bats with bulbous clogs, clowns, two backing singers, which seemed to be singing from another dimension. The trumpeter sang through his horn, sent panic into the mic, and the music burst into something rugged, vicious jazz, bowling round the gills and seams. When the journalist came and her breath was as honey gleaming, we went to a small place at the back of the tent to conduct an interview. But I was telling you about my mother and how sometimes I was unable to speak full sentences in her presence. And I have said many times besides and writ of how my mother and father separated when I was maybe less than a year old, and how it was my father's mother who held me in the spoon of her arms. How my mother stood at the gate and couldn't come in. It was, how to say, a tragic atmosphere. And how years later, when language returned to me, I saw my mother sitting in a chair, wrapped in the robes of a corpse, stretched out amongst the garden, wind whistling like Sebeletta in her throat, high-pitched like a plea. So one of the things I did in this book, and I would read maybe just a couple more poems, there's a series of poems here about my mom. Because after Sonnets for Albert, a lot of people were like, "Oh man, when are you going to write a book of poems about your mom? You know, your mother, what about your mom?" I was like, well, you know, I could have pulled the classic, "Well, you haven't read my work." But I didn't. But if you have, you'd see that my mother is in everything. She appears in every book. And the only reason I couldn't put her in one was because it was too painful. The memory of her is too much. My mom died when she was like 49 of breast cancer, which was really young, and it was really traumatic and really difficult. So, as it has to be. So I couldn't see myself putting together a whole book of her. My father was a little bit easier to write about because I could hold him at a distance, and he was funny, and you know, he died when he was in his 70s, and you know, he had a life. Well, my mom's was different. That was more, I couldn't put it together. But there's a series of poems here about my mom, and I wanted to read a couple of them. Maybe just one. Maybe I'll read a couple of them. This is Blood in My Throat. She was not where I left her in a hospital bed. I saw her in the courtyard walking with a bag of soft clothes. Her cancer like it gone. I said, "Mother, I thought you." And she said, "Well, you see me alive." And she rocked back and laughed on that hot asphalt Sunday. But on the outskirts of scenic time, sagebush began to burn, and on the veranda a line of full women sat with their heads tied white, fanning flies from their syphilitic shin bones and waiting for her body to fall from the sky. Blood in my throat. My brother and I, in a rented car he drove, speeding around them mountainsides, with the steering wheel revealed as bent so that turning left would really tumble cliff face and plunge blue jungle below to the right till he almost spent the rugged road. But in 1983, I jumped out near the Amerindian Bridge, in mid-flight turning to see him panic and pump brakes, snarl and skid and fling his hand and wrap the car around the hog plum tree, see blood rip out like kite-tail, shirt-tail, cut-tail, firefly, whip-snake, firefly, cutlass, blade, blood in my throat. Yes, so I was going to read another poem from here, which is called Cora, which is about one of the earliest memories I have of my mother. So I never got to live with my mom. My mom and dad separated when I was like a baby, and she went on to do her own thing. He went on to do her own thing. I lived with my grandparents. But I do have really early memories before I was taken away from my mom. And this is one of them. This is of her. I have a memory of my mom beside a river, cooking in a pot beside the river. Cora. Heading every east along the coast on a road we were on. We had just left the thrift shop, sheer drop, scorched rim of the world, streets where vendors sold khaki masks and magnets. The cool leaves of morning warmed through the hours, and the poet and I go walking along the river, black river bottom, burnt mother, rue, and rice in the water. Our mother who art among the bamboo, washing an iron pot in brackish water. The burnt smell of an image which, in relinquishing the gulf between language and what it describes, is forever fading into the cool dark where the water is deepest. And Empires. This is a poem that we were talking about earlier, about the beauty of the valley. Yeah, the quote is from Walcott, which is the epigram. The beauty of the valley does not erase history, but is stronger than the presence of the cane factory. In Malik, my cousins were clearing a drain. Silt and vines were tangled in the water, mussel in the water like dregs of an abattoir. When the river came down, it brought panty wash, dialysis swill, and original bones from mansions hid in the northern hills. The rubric of our history is synonymous with loss. But haven't we built such beautiful homes on the hillside coming down? Empires of one brick and pillar post, empires of galvanize and dirt. I stood in my English clothes and watched my cousins make a river flow again, and color came back to the earth. And I want to finish with a poem called Anson, God of Bread. So as I was saying earlier, a lot of the poems in this collection, and actually in a lot of my work, has sort of grotesque elements. And I don't know what the attraction of that is, but I just like nasty stuff, you know. I like to write about decay and debt and debt struggles and just stuff like that. Because I guess growing up, those were some of the things that really left a big impact on me, seeing stuff. I mean, I've seen some stuff, as you all have, right? But a lot of people don't write about it. I like to write about it because I think the things that we try to hide or not talk about are the things which make the best literature. So I had a friend in school who was a Chinese guy. I went to primary school with him. And to cut a long story short, we left school, and years later, I was in Trinidad. Just before I came to London, I was working in an insurance company. I was working in an insurance company. I wasn't selling insurance. I was just working in the office and never did any work, but just wrote poetry all day. And didn't get fired because the boss was a family friend. Yeah, it was a cushy job. Anyway, I came home and I had the newspaper, and I read that this friend of mine, Anson, had died. And he died in a really bizarre incident. He was working in a bakery, and his hand got trapped in one of the mixing machines, and he got sucked in and minced in with the bread. So that's why the poem is called Anson, God of Bread. Anson Lee stood tall over his flock, but the boy was timorous, meek. One day his mother marched upon the gravel of the schoolyard to wave her finger in my face. So then I watched Anson from a distance as we walked home past the mint and white mosque. Years hence, I had been to work, and returning home with the evening news, I read that Anson had died in a bakery in Carep. O grind of bone and torn from this life, like the kneading of flesh with the prone teeth of a machine. So many hot tears were shed in that slant house on Temple Street. I imagined his mother's eyes, denial of the dead. Thanks. Yeah.
We've got time, if we're disciplined, for a couple of questions, I think, if you're still happy to.
Yeah, absolutely.
to take them,
Yeah,
Ashley.
absolutely.
Yeah, there's one right here in the front.
Thank you for that. I just thought that was a really fabulous thing.
Thank you.
You both. It was great. Thank you. I feel
Thanks
really
to Luke.
lucky to
Luke
just
came
be
prepared,
sitting in
man.
This little space
Damn. Yeah.
up close. It was really great. Thank you. There's a lot that you've said that I'd like to ask you about, but I'm only just going to ask you one thing, which is, given your relationship, your work with music and that music is such a kind of core part of who you are.
Yeah.
I wondered if you ever write to kind of particular tracks. Do you use music as a kind of sort of like a restraint for your poetry? What's kind of because you spoke about the score and poetry being a kind of like the sort of the music with words and stuff, but I wondered, like, sort of practically, kind of technically, when you're working at home, do you ever kind of put on certain tracks and kind of write to them?
Yeah, I do, absolutely. Not specific tracks as such, but particular genres of music. Yeah. I mean, if I'm working on a piece and sometimes the poems come as fragments. Sometimes you have a fragment of an idea. It's very rare that you get a fully finished poem in one sitting, unless you're someone like Luke.
No, very rare.
Yeah.
Then you're like, oh.
Then it's a gift, right?
Yeah.
It's a gift. But usually it's fragments that you build upon and you work on over a period of time. And there's a point where the poem, I know the atmosphere of the poem and I know what music would work with it. So sometimes I might listen to something that might push a particular trajectory of improvisation through the poem. Sometimes it's usually free jazz. Free jazz gives me the freedom to be random, and I like randomness and risk, so I work with risk and chance a lot by listening to free jazz. The other genre that really works for me, more so with prose than poetry, but sometimes poetry as well, is 80s soul music. Stuff that I grew up listening when I was, younger, listening to, Earth, Wind and Fire or really cheap Peebo Bryson, who died recently. If I put that on, I usually work at night. So if I put that on at 1 a.m. in the morning, I could write till 5. I could just keep going. It's like fuel. It keeps me going. It gets me in a particular really warm, fuzzy zone, and I'm able to write forever listening to that stuff. So it varies, but those are the only two. Sometimes I just need silence, Yeah.
Does anyone else have a question?
For the prose poem you read, where's on the continuum? Because I certainly can't hear it. But where does the prose poem start, and where does the poem end, and where does prose start?
Nowhere. I think for me it's all the same. I think the Prose is a trick for me because I'm a poet. So when I write prose, I'm always trying to trick the reader and make them think it's prose, but it's really a poem.
Yeah.
It's a poem. It's a poem. It's a prose poem, but it's called a prose poem. It's a poem. So yeah, I work with it like that. If I'm writing, even when I'm writing fiction, I write poems. It's a poem. It's one long poem that just looks like prose, but it's a poem. It's poetry. It's a poetic approach to language. Yeah, yeah. I can't write, he walked upstairs and opened the door. It's, you know. Yeah.
What would you have to be listening to in order to get he walked upstairs and opened the door?
Oh, it'd have to be something else. I have to find some other way of phrasing it. The door. I have to change the foot.
Don't have to do it
I
live,
don't
you
get it.
It's too extreme. You know. Yeah, this is, yeah, here we go.
I've seen you perform a couple of times over the last year, which has
Oh, okay.
always been amazing.
Oh, thank you.
But the last couple of times I've seen you, you've talked a bit about your first book, The African Origins
Yeah.
of Prose.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, is this collection also in dialogue with that text?
Maybe. I haven't thought of it like that. That's a good point. Actually, I haven't thought of it like that. I guess in some aspects, yeah, exploring a particular kind of futurism, Afrofuturism. Some of that is in this book. But I'm working on a novel now, which is a science fiction novel, which definitely has more sort of relationship to African origins. Yeah. But actually, African Origins is being republished this year, 20 years. Yeah, it's a 20th anniversary.
Very expensive.
Yeah, I know. It's coming out in
I'm gonna sell
November.
my copy.
You sold your copy?
No, I'm going to.
Oh,
before
you're
the-
going
before this reissue
Yeah.
comes. No, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to hold it. But this is, I mean, we can't actually begin again, but this is a very good question because I was thinking about how the process of putting together your selected poems and reissuing that earlier work must change your you know, if you go through all your work and read your work to put together a selected poems, that's quite a distinct
Yeah.
activity, and that must change, ground you somehow, maybe. So,
Yeah.
so this book kind of might come out of that.
Yeah, I tried not to think about the selected
way.
works
You've
too
gotta
much.
be, yeah, it's a bit superstitious stuff. the
Yeah,
selected poems.
I just let the editor do that, and you know, I don't know. I think, you know, poetry is one of those art forms that is, you get better as you get older.
Uh-huh.
If you keep doing it with a true intent, and if you dedicate yourself to it on a, you know, on a deep level, I keep coming back to spirituality, but if you dedicate yourself to the poem or to the writing of poetry, it rewards you and you get better. You get better at it. As long as you don't stay in your own little corner and say, I'm not going to read anybody else, I'm going to, you know, that's dangerous.
Yeah, that's
But if
deadly.
if you keep open and listening and reading people, and
Yeah.
you just get better and better. You know, it's not like being a singer. I mean, I saw a clip of Jamiroquai singing, and it wasn't that great. So as you get older, as a musician, some things
Yeah.
might fail you, but
Yeah.
as a writer,
Yeah.
so now I feel like, you know, the next collection of poetry might be even more huge and powerful, and, you know,
I love it.
so yeah,
That's what I
I'm
want.
getting better.
Okay, well, you all have to go and buy this book and read it, and we have to say thank you to Anthony for doing so
We got to
well.
say thank you to Luke.
Say
Forget
thank
me.
you to
Luke,
Luke.
come on. Thank you.
And we got to say thank you to Pages of Hackney as well for being such excellent hosts.
Yeah, thank you.